And now we are going to lead right in to Leah Groppo, who's going to help you put all of this great information together into some realistic goals to fit into your day-to-day. Leah Groppo is a diabetes educator and senior clinical dietitian in Stanford's Endocrinology Clinic and Diabetes Care Program. She has experience counseling patients one-on-one on how to achieve their health goals, interpret pump and CGM data, focus on customized diabetes management. And at Stanford, she teaches diabetes education classes, conducts one-on-one appointments, teaches fellows and medical students, and mentors interns. Leah is board certified in advanced diabetes management, and she has a passion for growing food and loves to garden with her family. So take it away, Leah.
Thank you so much. So I'm really excited to round out our presentation. You heard from 3 other dietitians already, really trying to keep today super practical, give you kind of the why and the science, but then really round it out and focus on what can you do? Because sometimes I feel like we get so excited about all the science, and then we're kind of not always left with as much practical, what can I do next? And so this section, I really want to talk about how do we take the things that we've learned today and the things that maybe have sparked your interest, and how do we put them into action into our life? So when we're thinking about making a change, I think especially coming from presentations, we can get very excited and very motivated. And so we might want to reinvent everything in our life, right? We might want to say, I'm going to do everything different. I'm going to make a drastic change. And where I think that sometimes can be very motivating for people, we always do want to really think back and say, what is a realistic change for us? Because we really want to have those quick wins. So when we make a change to our health, we want to be able to have small, realistic goals so that we feel successful and we really tell our minds like we are somebody who can make these healthy changes. Rather, really large, lofty, challenging goals sometimes can set us up to feeling like, oh, what's the point? It's too challenging. So we want to kind of pare them down to what's realistic. And I also think it's so important to not underestimate what goes into change. So it's hard to see, but in the back of my slide, there are all these dirty dishes. If you know me, I actually don't really love to do lots of dirty dishes. And so when I'm thinking about a new recipe to try, or with Gina, thinking about those 3 Ps and meal planning, I really love her tip around trying to have that magic time after the grocery store, because then you're able to really prep, do dishes, and it really cuts down the dishes during the weekday. So really thinking about what goes into that change. One of my favorite terms also is the empathy gap. So I can define this. So we want to set goals that are realistic around the empathy gap. So we want to root the time that we set our goals in the time that we have to accomplish the goal. For example, if we set a goal for dinner or snacking, but we set that goal after a meal, perhaps after breakfast, we're feeling relaxed, not hungry. That's not really the time we want to set that goal, because that may not be a realistic goal. So if our goal is going to implement at 3 p.m. when we're hungry, tired, decompressing from maybe a busy day, we want to set that goal at 3 p.m. because that's going to help to ensure our brain thinking through what is realistic to really start with our goal. So that's the empathy gap, having some empathy with ourselves when we're setting goals. And then thinking really around the examples that have been given today, really trying to think about how do you make that realistic? If you're thinking about meal planning, snacks, or adding those gut healthy options, Elaine listed so many different ways to prep lots of foods that are pre and probiotics as well. So we always want to add that element of fun. So when we're making changes, we don't want it to be an arduous, kind of awful, teeth pulling change. We really want it to be something that sparks a little bit of joy in our life, something that sounds interesting, fun, intriguing, maybe trying new recipes, new snacks, Like Stephanie mentioned, thinking around something you're not going to get bored of. Don't plan the same snack for 5 days in a row. Add some variety, add some new flavor, maybe try a vegan snack. So we want to think about how do we make that immediate experience gratifying? So how do we add to that healthy experience and make that in and of itself the positive reinforcement? Because oftentimes I work with people living with prediabetes and diabetes mostly. If we're looking at lab changes, somebody's going to have to do that change for perhaps 90 days or 3 months. And so if we don't embed really fun things or something interesting within that change, by maybe even a week or 2 weeks or even a month, if someone's really determined, they're going to stick with it. But if we have to wait 3 whole months before we see a change doing something we're not interested in, that habit is really not going to be formed. So for this side, we really want to think about how do we make what we're changing immediately gratifying. New flavors in food, meal prepping that involves our family, adding new fun vegetables, all of those things can make that interesting in the moment. Just another way to say this, pairing fun, excitement can really increase your kind of immediate positive experience because it makes complete sense. Why would we do something that we really don't want to do, even if it's for our health, if there's no interest built into it? So really, we have to be our own detectives and say, for me, what sounds fun? Is that walking and adding my favorite music to that walk, or maybe a podcast or a story? Or is that me cooking a food that I'm really enjoying, that I really like at home versus maybe getting food delivered for that meal? So really trying to figure out how can you modify your goals in your life to make them really fun and have a positive experience. And then really trying to pair sort of, we know there are long-term benefits to making health changes. Maybe if you're looking at blood pressure, blood sugar, lipids, gut health, but really trying to pair and make that interesting in the moment. So there's something else that I think is also a really interesting term, thinking around temptation bundling. So in the prior slide, I mentioned thinking around how do we take the thing that we should do, want to do, that healthy behavior, and pair it with something that's super fun and gratifying. So maybe it's exercise, and then we're pairing it with our favorite music. So perhaps we only listen to our favorite music when we're walking, or we only listen to our favorite podcast when we go on walks. So it really builds in that anticipation and excitement around that healthy behavior. And that's how we really route these changes and solidify them in our brain to make them more into habits over time. And then I just think that it's always important to talk about when we embark on a change, they often are not linear. They're not going to be smooth. You set a goal, you accomplish a goal, you set a goal, you accomplish a goal. And sometimes when we feel like we're not really making big changes and we feel a little stuck, perhaps, really backing up and saying, are we actually developing the root system to this healthy lifestyle change? So are we really investing in our thought process about how we meal plan, how we structure? Are we creating time on the weekend to maybe just sit down and look at how we could meal plan and carving that time out? That actually is creating a really strong foundation and root system to making the change. Perhaps you plan a meal plan and don't have time to go to the grocery store. Still having the time and really thinking through what you would want to put into a meal plan is definitely valid and important. So goals do take a lot of infrastructure and foundation and root system. And so really building on that is also part of achieving your goal, maybe before you even see changes in your numbers. And so we always want to look at A1Cs lowering, things like that. But sometimes taking the time to really create a strong foundation is what's going to give you that very sustainable lowering of A1C, lowering of weight, whatever your goal may be. If you also feel stuck with change, sometimes it can be really helpful to give yourself advice. So oftentimes we have our own internal dialogue, which may not be so positive. Maybe, oh, can't you do this? Why can't you do this? This is frustrating. Do I want to do it? Things like that. But if you were to talk to a close friend, a family member, perhaps you'd be a little bit more positive, focusing on the action, focusing on things that you had already done. So almost imagining yourself giving yourself advice can be a really great strategy to get unstuck. Um, Thinking also about something you'd like to change. So going back to those other sides, what do you find gratifying in the moment? What sparks joy? What is interesting to you? Those are great things to think about. Really starting small. And when you start with a small goal, know that there's this whole root system foundation that you're creating in that goal. So truly not that small of a goal. And then I think sometimes it can be helpful to reflect on our prior accomplishments. If we think back to ourselves, what we were doing maybe 6 months prior, 12 months prior, what are the health changes that we've made over those 6 to 12 months? What maybe place were we back then? And to really reflect back and realize these small changes make really big impacts when we have them over a longer duration. Um, and then, of course, like I mentioned before, really checking that internal dialogue and seeing, is that an internal dialogue that feels like it's lowering barriers, or does your internal dialogue feel like it's elevating and increasing barriers? And then, like I mentioned, change is not linear. When we encounter barriers, things happen, life happens, holidays, birthdays, things like that. But we really want to focus on that self talk and that internal dialogue, and then really keep moving forward and acknowledge that sometimes we're creating that foundation and root system. We may not see as many notable changes in numbers, but we're really creating that sustainable goal and change. And just some final thoughts before we get to the questions. Really pick something that's meaning for you. So Elaine and Gina and Stephanie all laid out different kind of meaningful changes that you could think about from today. A broad variety if you're focused on your gut health, adding meal planning, or snacking to your day. So really pick what's meaningful and interesting to you. Consider setting your environment up with cues. So I think it was Gina mentioned maybe laying out those fruits on your countertop so you can see them, and it's something that prompts you before you leave for work to throw one in your bag. Really asking yourself, is this something I want to do, or do you feel like I should do it? And if it's something you should do, perhaps that's a goal, but also maybe you want to really reframe that and say, what would I really like to do? What would be interesting? That might be your best first step. And then you can always get to the thing that you should do once you've maybe built up some really positive kind of flow with your prior goals that you've accomplished. And then finally, starting small. It feels small, but oftentimes goals that people set that they feel are small are often not.